Change is inevitable. Stop worrying about change and focus on progress. If you find something greater you want to do or something else you want to transition to, that's a clear indication that where you are at is probably not where you're supposed to be. And I think it gives you freedom or validation to do it.
Anybody else have work up in the air and curious about what the future holds, maybe even looking to reinvent themselves? Then join in. Let's do this. All right, my reinventing friends. Today we're talking about something that I think a lot of people are quietly wrestling with right now, and something that's a central theme in our Reinvention podcast, which is what kind of life and future makes the most sense for me to work towards? Now, while this question has always been at the heart of most personal development genres and the central theme of virtually every, quote, midlife crisis, AI is forcing the issue because it is radically changing the way we work, the way we make money, and the manner by which we build a sustainable future for ourselves. And I say this virtually in every episode because we all must wake up to the fact that things are shifting right now at lightning speed, and the only correct action is to accept it and learn how to make smart decisions with it. So I'm really happy to be sitting here with Charles Lee, who poses an important question. Am I designing my life intentionally, or am I simply reacting? And I want you to get out a pen and paper, my listeners, okay? Because our discussion will be a great litmus test for you in terms of how you are dealing with the radical shifts we are dealing with. Now, Charles is the founder and CEO of Ideation, an innovation and strategy company that helps organizations turn ideas into action. And for years, he's worked with executives, entrepreneurs, and global brands to bridge the gap between vision and execution. In his new book, Design Your Good Life, Charles takes the wisdom he's learned by working with so many successful companies and turns it into a life plan we can all use. And he challenges the idea that purpose is something we simply must discover. Instead, he argues that purpose is something that we intentionally design through our choices, our values, and the actions we take every day. So today we're going to talk about the process of reinventing yourself, all right? And we're going to dive into specific tactics and practices you can use to build a meaningful life in a world that's changing fast. So Charles, first, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Todd. I'm super excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, I think it's highly resonant. And you have a really impressive track record of advising executives from teams and organizations like Google, Toyota, Wells Fargo, Tom's, Sequoia Capital, Vanguard, so many others. I'm curious, why did you decide to write a book that appears to be more focused on personal development and growth?
That's a great question. I mean, honestly, just looking at the title, Design Your Good Life, it sounds so like audacious and, who am I to talk about this topic? And so it's been quite the journey. For me, this topic really came up over the years because in working with executives and leaders, at the end of the day, no matter how successful you become or how much you achieve or how many accolades you receive, I think people do ask the fundamental question, like, what does this all mean? Was it worth it? They're not doubting their ability to produce good things for the world. I think it's more of aligning whether their professional pursuits are lining up with who they truly are. And so while this is both definitely a personal book for a lot of people, there's plenty of things in there that bridge it, because I think we are living in a time where people don't want to disassociate their professional pursuits from who they are as individuals. And so I thought it was a timely book filled with lots of research and insights on maybe how to navigate. So I think, let me just say it from the get-go, it's really not a formula. I designed it as a framework. And I think it's really important because it's not about me trying to be a guru in any way or write a audacious book like this. I think it's more of just providing some design frameworks that help people just kind of navigate all the way from inspiration all the way through building meaningful legacy in their lives.
Love it. I think it's just maybe the most important conversation right now. And I'm curious, working with so many executives and people that are successful in the corporate world like I do, right? This is what I do. I'm an executive coach. I talk with a lot of people all day, and behind closed doors, people come to me and they ask this question, like, I'm working really hard and I have all the success, but like, I don't know if this is all worth it right now. So I think it's very relevant and central to reinvention in general. Were you seeing the same thing? Were you having people come to you behind closed doors and ask these bigger questions? And is that what spurred this idea to come up with a framework?
Yeah, as you know, like working with any high performing leader, all decisions have implications and consequences. And most decisions are difficult. It may benefit the company or benefit some people within the business, but it may also hurt others because choices have consequences. And I think for people, it's not easy. The more influence you get, the more quote unquote power you have, it impacts other lives. And I think when you get to that place of leadership, you're bound to think about what really matters to you in life. You know, do your choices align with your values? And it's not to paint the picture of like large brands being some type of evil empire. There's plenty of really good people, as you know, Todd, that we get to work with. And it's people really trying to navigate, being true to who they are, creating good for their employees or their teams. And yet it comes to a place of friction and tension and personal exploration. And so I think every one of us, because either you're going to just let life happen, right? People say life just happened, and you kind of go with the flow, go with the system. You do the things that most incentivizes you professionally. And yet in the midst of that, I think it's really important that like, unless we embrace our autonomy and of our own agency, especially with growth of things like AI and other tools that are exponentially growing, I think we're going to lose a part of ourselves. We're going to find ourselves in kind of a drift, not just career, just in life, where we find ourselves in a place that we had no plans of being months or years down the road.
Go further than that and think that we're already there.
Yeah.
In my experience, most people are already there. I mean, a lot of my work is I just have people take out a mirror and look in it and ask themselves the bigger questions. Am I really happy? Am I fulfilled? Do I feel like the talents and gifts that are given are fully in play, that I'm making a positive contribution all across the board with as little sacrifice as possible, right? And, you know, the answers usually are no, I'm not, you know, like when we're in a one-on-one setting. And that's why I wanted to do this podcast, to talk about the process of reinventing yourself, because the promise of reinvention is that it can be better on the other side, right? And I have my own frameworks, right? I have my own frameworks for how to help people go through this process, but that's why we're doing this, Charles, because I want to know your framework. Let's talk about the things that you share in the book. And let's start from the beginning, right? When someone is like intrigued by this conversation, they go out and they buy your book. What's the first step in the process for you, right? What is the first thing that you have people confront when they're in this exploration?
Yeah, I mean, the book's called Design Your Good Life. So it begins with, you know, working towards how one thinks about what a good life is. And in the book, I actually provide a lot of research, you know, dating all the way back to Aristotle, to some present day thoughts about what a good life is. And I'm not trying to determine what that good life is for people, but what research shows is when people have explored this in their own ways and their own worldviews and such, you end up with a couple of different conclusions. One is generally a good life is associated with good and loving relationships. That if you have people in your life, whether it's your immediate nuclear family or siblings or friends or being a part of a meaningful community, all those kinds of things people would deem good. So when people are on their deathbeds, they're not regretting those relationships. They're probably regretting a lot of other things. And the second thing is feeling like you're contributing in some kind of meaningful way to your community, no matter how small, or maybe to the world, you know, global issues. And I think those two things, generally people agree that, hey, if I can have great relationships, if I can feel like I'm actually adding value to the world, that's a quote unquote good life. So no matter what that is, it kind of starts with that journey saying, hey, let's reframe this. Let's even reframe, like for me, I came to the United States when I was 5 from Korea. So as an immigrant, we came pursuing quote unquote the American dream. Well, I went back and tried to understand where this concept came from. It was actually a social commentary this gentleman made about how around the Great Depression time, how materialistic America had become. And this is like a century ago, right? So how really self-centered people were with accumulating things as a means of success. And he was like, no, this country was designed, the American dream is to provide equity and access to people, to give everybody a fair shot at actually building something meaningful. So it kind of starts there. And then I get into the framework of the different, you know, phases and elements, and each one has a particular mindset, a skill set, a drive, and an outcome to pursue.
I love it. Okay. So let's talk about the relationship piece. Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're living in a world right now that is hyper isolated. we've kind of lost the ability to have these authentic connections. I see this in my one-on-one coaching practice a lot, and in the group coaching I do. A lot of this is relearning how to relate to others because we're siloed right now. So I agree with the premise. I'm sure you have a ton of research about why that brings joy and fulfillment more than
Yeah,
anything else. And by the way, one of my main practices that I was known for years was having people write their own eulogy, right, in a very particular
amazing.
way. So that way they can actually have a vision for what would be a good life, a meaningful life for themselves. Most people don't know, right? But the relationships, in my experience, also was one of the main things, because you're surrounded by loved ones. Like that's what really counts. In your book and in your practice, how do you advise people to make that shift over to it's a rewiring to actually look at others in different ways and really connect? It's hard for a lot of people to do that. What are your thoughts on that? What are some of the tactics or tools that we can just become better at relating?
One practical exercise that I do with leaders is just having them literally write down on paper on just on one side of the column things internally that are shaping their own sense of what like success or good might be. But on the other side, listing external factors that may be influencing the way they think about themselves and such. And very quickly, you'll see that the right-hand column gets filled up. It's easier to fill up. It's my phone, it's my boss, it's the social construct I live in, or it's the pressure I receive, it's social media content. It's so all of these things, and people quickly see that, what shapes who I think I'm becoming is actually externally driven. And it kind of opens up their eyes to when they see it on paper to say, I actually think I need to kind of reclaim what I'm feeling internally and the
Mhm.
things that at one point really mattered to me. And the more honest they can become, the easier it's going to be for them to reset and more healthy they're going to be. But if you find them being defensive as they're going through this exercise, a lot's happening inside. One example of this is in my book, I talk about curiosity, how it's a touted value of so many companies during the interview process, right? If you
Mhm.
see the word curious, it exponentially grew like around COVID to now in
Mhm.
the application process and descriptors of the people they want. But once someone gets into a company, more often than not, usually within 6 months, the curiosity levels drop by half. And the reason for that, I think research is showing is that, when you get into a company, they may encourage curiosity, for example, but you soon realize that curiosity is not rewarded or incentivized. And it's easier to align yourself to the practices and behaviors of an organization than it is to stay curious and truly maybe who you are.
Right.
And so you multiply that over years, it's quite possible you end up drifting to a version of yourself that may not be the version that gives you the greatest joy. And so that's just one example of how external realities and structures and environments can kind of drift us away from things that we ought to explore more deeply for ourselves. And now with like technology and AI, it's easier to give away the keys to your own identity and let some other machine kind of dictate who you ought to be based on their learning model that reshuffles existing information, probably lacks a level of creativity, reshuffling information so that it gives you guidance to really probably the medium way of living life. And it kind of devoids you of your own self identity.
I think you're touching on such a central theme here of identity, right? The question of who am I? Like one of the most ancient questions, right? And I love that the research is showing in your book that you've done that curiosity is valued in the beginning of a process to get a job, but then isn't valued later on, which then silos us into habituating ways of being that are valued, within a company and in a life where we get away from ourselves, as you said. And now we have to almost reclaim, I'm calling it reinvent, right? Like what it actually means to be us. So I want to dive in even a little deeper on this. Okay. I'm curious what you came up with. And it sounds like you did a lot of research on this book. And so when the process of actually reclaiming identity or not being as influenced by external factors, okay, how do we do that? Like, what are some of the techniques or practices where we can learn to separate the external from the internal wisdom?
Yeah. So I divided up the book into like three phases. It's called Spark, Actualize, and Influence. So at the beginning, around Spark, it's really the idea of giving yourself permission to explore again. And so if you feel like something on the horizon, you get an inkling, kind of to your point, Todd, that I need to reinvent or refocus some of the things that are internal in my life. The mindset in that whole phase is around like curiosity, actually going back and learning how to be curious again and really doing some like practical practices, like, little things. Like for me, the way I stay curious, one of the ways is I'll go to a conference outside of my industry every year. I just want to be in rooms where I am the least knowledgeable, and I'm there just really to observe how people think and solve problems. I'm asking dumb questions. So I'll just go attend something and I realize, like, medical professionals think differently than, creative designers or developers or entrepreneurs or founders networks or, those kinds of things. And for me, it's really helpful because it gives me a sense like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And that's where like good ideas start to connect, right? Because there, the skill set in the spark phase is all around ideation. How do you like diverge from your normal mode of thinking and then converge it into some, maybe it's human-centered design approach, but like bring it down to a couple of like viable options where you get a little bit more clarity and your outcome is a sense of purpose and direction in that first phase. So it kind of starts there. I feel like curiosity, no matter if it's for professional reasons or maybe you want a better relationship with your teenage daughter. I think that begins with curiosity too, versus trying to quote unquote parent them right away. I think it's really, increasing that empathy and a desire and an open mindedness. And that's a mind shift that is required versus an exercise you do. And so the book kind of dives into really refocusing and retraining our brains to think in that kind of way.
I really like the beginning of what you just shared about, to me, it's about permission to think about it differently. Like give yourself a break and permission to think about the life trajectory that you've been on and the potential trajectory you're going to just differently. And that spurns curiosity. It actually opens up a lot of space, right? Like that's why I love this show when I get people like you on there, because it's like, if you're listening, like give yourself a break and start to think about things differently a little bit. Give yourself the permission over the next 3 months to explore and open yourself up to new ideas, to new conversations, to new people, right? That's all. You start there. Yeah. But I love the second thing that you shared, and this is fascinating to me. I never thought about this. You go to conferences that are different and outside the realm of what you do, just so you can learn a different way of thinking. I mean, going to conferences is time consuming.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're paying for tickets, you're paying for hotel rooms, probably flights, like things like that, right? You are literally investing your time and energy. You're a family man, like your time away from family. Talk to me about like that level of investment, and has there been an ROI on it for you in general? I'm just really curious because I never thought about doing that, but now I'm thinking, yeah, what a great idea. Like I live here in LA. What kind of conferences can I go to just to feel the difference in energy in the way that people think? And then tell us what it does when you assimilate all of this and come back in for your own work.
Yeah, I think for me, and I do want to frame it like there are definitely conferences that I go fly to, which, can become pricey to your point. But there's like plenty of like local meetups too that you try to kind of throw in and you could literally Google things that, maybe I'll read an article on a interesting topic. Even if you like went to a conference within your own sector, like sometimes I will go to a developers conference. I'm not a developer. We work with developers, but in no way would I ever say I'm a developer. But just going and learning from people who are more like engineer minded really helps to kind of sharpen that. This year I went to CES. I'm not in necessarily the product space. I'm more professional services, but a lot of our clients work in that space. So I'm not an expert, but so I thought, hey, I want to see how people are solving some day-to-day problems with like technology or robots. And I know just enough to be interested and asking like, hey, how is robot integration coming to like domestic living versus like manufacturing or, so it forces me, I've always kind of naturally has a lean towards curiosity. Or it may be that if you can't afford, this may sound luxurious for some people to say, hey, why am I going to spend like 5-10 grand to go to a conference? I'll say like, pick a topic and for a season, even if you don't know how you're going to use that, learn it. Maybe it's a series of like history videos about a certain point in time, or I've done, and this kind of sounds a little bit neurotic at times, but I've done like go back and read an Algebra 2 book because being a former philosophy grad school major, for me, it's just I know it'll sharpen my thinking skills, even if I'll never use it. So I think it's just the practice of integrating into your life of learning something new because, we tend to bank on in the name of efficiency and the name of just really improving our own craft. I think that divergent part is what gets us stuck, that lack of divergence. So we could find ways if we took the time. Like I sometimes I work in marketing. So I went to a marketing gathering just for Asian Americans. I was just kind of curious, like, how do you view that topic from, this particular network? So I just went. So it's just kind of like trying different things to see if I could see it from a new perspective. And given our business working across industries has paid huge dividends as far as ROI, to your question, because in most conversations I could probably have some type of reference point and say, hey, I actually went to this event in your
Right.
field. I went to a legal conference. We work with law firms. So I think it does over time yield ROI and insights.
What about the fact that people are scared of change? Okay. So when I hear this, there's a lot of wisdom in what you're sharing. I'm actually learning a lot right now. This is great. I have ideas of things that I'm going to go do, like breaking out of our shell a little bit and saying,
Yeah.
all right, I'm going to go explore something. You really embody this quality of curiosity. I can just feel it. Like you're like, I'll go there. I'll go do that thing. Right. I think where a lot of people get stuck is this idea that, well, if I go start doing those things, I may discover that I'm really interested in that, or I might find some connections that's going to cause me to make a big change in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And now you're being confronted with maybe the underlying truth, which is I'm not really that happy in this thing. And I do want change, but I'm also scared for that change because that's going to require a lot of effort, a lot of unknown, and a lot of uncertainty. How do you recommend people navigate that, process? Because when you start to look for change, it's going to happen and it's necessary for people to do it. But when they get confronted with that moment, what do you say? How do they navigate that part of the journey?
Yeah, I have a saying is change is inevitable. Stop worrying about change and focus on progress. That this disruption in your life, we are human beings. And so disruptions can be seen as negative or it can inspire something positive in one's life. And so I try to reframe what the word disruption might be, is when we allow ourselves to do that, to your point, if you find something greater you want to do or something else you want to transition to your point, that's exactly just a clear indication that where you are at is probably not where you're supposed to be. And I think it gives you freedom or validation to do it. Will it be scary? Yeah. But when you start breaking down someone's passion and skill set and such, most of the reasons we come up with as to why we can't do it are usually hypothetical. It reminds me of like what Stephen Pressfield used to write about. He had a book called The War of Art. And in it, he talks about kind of the lizard brain, the part of our brain that kicks up when we're about to do something with all of these irrational reasons as to why we can't pursue that. Mm-hmm. And so it's not to say you don't do your homework, don't do your research, but you could probably reason your way through some of the seeming challenges if you took the time to document it, get some thought partners in it, ask some friends or colleagues to help you think through some ways about paving a path, working with people like you and reading books. You could get yourself through it. And I think if anything, you're going to look back and be incredibly happy that you did.
I think you're right. I mean, that's what I've seen, is that, yeah, change can be scary for some folks, but going through it, it's almost inevitable that you see the light and you find a pathway that actually is better. And so a lot of this is just about choosing to get unstuck and dealing with the fear of being stuck because you are. I mean, people listen to my show because they're stuck and they want to reinvent. And there's a promise to that. But then the reality is that, yeah, you're going to have to confront some stuff. You may have to have some hard conversations with people that are close to you or not going to understand your need for change because you haven't been, at the forefront with it. You haven't been talking about it for a long time. So it's all these things that you do need support and you do need coaching, right? To be able to kind of go through this process more smoothly. I'm curious about your perspective, because I got you on the line here, about what is emerging in AI and what you're seeing, because you're working with a lot of leaders, you're in there with a lot of companies. What kind of disruption do you think that we're seeing and where do you think this is headed? And look, I'm going to let you off the hook. No one really knows, but change is happening so fast. Are we going to see a lot of people looking to alternative ways to make money, entrepreneurship, fractional work? Are the companies going to figure it out and industry is going to boom in a lot of ways? What is your sense of people that are midlife, mid-career, in jobs? Like, how should they be navigating this moment in time that is unique, right? Because we are at a game-changing juncture, like with AI. There's no doubt, that there is something emerging here that's going to change things. What are your thoughts on that? I know it's a general question, but I just want to get
No,
your
I
sense.
think I think a foundation we'll have to figure out, and I think you're kind of asking it indirectly, and that is, what's the relationship between human beings and emerging tech like AI? There's no doubt, like AI, especially, at this stage, a lot of the generative AI and some of the agentic options and tools are great. It will allow us to take tasks that we normally do and either automate them or have a machine help us figure out some of those tasks. What AI, I think, in my opinion, doesn't do is it doesn't necessarily replace our human attributes, some elements of it. For example, I always encourage leaders like, yeah, I think there needs to be a ton of integration and the data's clear. I do a talk around like embracing human agency in the world of AI right now. And in that, there's a lot of research around the fact that even the AI integration that's happening in most companies, like about half, aren't training their people on the tools. They're just implementing. So there's bound to be a gap in understanding and confusion about which tools I ought to use based on which department I'm working in and such. So it is a challenging time. And the other thing is that distrust in AI is only growing. You kind of saw this in all of the graduation speeches this year, students booing. It is becoming a short-term threat for sure for a lot of young people. But if you are, you're a little bit more seasoned and you're in mid-career, my recommendation is, look, some of the things that AI can't do is it can't replace your lived experience. AI can't replace your critical thinking. But here's the thing is we can derode our critical thinking by giving up our decision-making to AI. And I encourage people, like, the way you increase critical thinking is it takes time struggling over specific problems. That's what makes us sharper as time goes by. And I love that human beings, when they think about the next step, there's often within us a hesitation. AIs don't hesitate, but I think hesitation is healthy. Or our intuition. There are times we don't know why we know something, but we end up being right. So there are things that are like uniquely human that I think we ought to embrace. And if you are in mid-career, I think really strengthening and positioning yourself in your practice and your behavior as a linchpin of providing wisdom to like even people underneath you, providing, insights and really thinking deeply about things are things that I think are still deeply needed within organizations. And then we're going to see over time that organizations are going to refocus and learn how to invest in its people again, which I'm excited about. Because, Todd, you've probably talked to leaders like, for how many years have we heard leaders say, like, if we had more time, if we had more, I would be investing more in my team, but I'm just so busy. Well, now AI is giving you a way out of that.
Giving you that time.
Yeah. And you actually can gain time. What will you do with that? Because your company is still, you're leading people, you're leading AI agents, you're leading robots, possibly. So how will you invest in your team? And so I think for people who are kind of mid-career, whether you leverage AI to start your own thing, I hope your listeners don't give up their autonomy, don't give up their agency. Because the more we do that, the less human I think we'll become. So that's my sense of where we're headed right now.
There really is a juxtaposition in terms of the need to adopt AI and get into the tools and kind of play with it a lot, right? And just understand. That's what everyone that comes on the show is saying it. Like, you need to get in there, you need to play with it. And like you said, AI doesn't hesitate. It's like this instant, right? And you can train it and prompt it in all these different ways, so that way it caters to you. And so that is also creating a wiring and a trajectory in our minds to think that way, right? To think more quickly like AI, because hey, everyone's got to do it. Everyone's got to do it. And then at the same time, people, like what you just said, you're not the only one saying it, but I agree with you. We also need to honor our human abilities, which is like diametrically different in a bunch of ways, like our intuition. Why do we understand something? Like the things that make us different than machines, we need to be able to develop those capacities. And I think there's an inherent challenge in that in terms of training. Like, okay, well, we need to get adopted on the tools, but then we also need to develop our human capacities to be more fluid, because that's really what's going to differentiate us in the future, right? And everyone's saying that. I don't think there's a balance on that right now, right? I think that there's a big push towards getting an AI, and like a lot of people are turning very machine-like, but then at the same time, our real value is going to be in our human abilities. How do you hold that juxtaposition? Like, are you seeing that there are leaders that are valuing the human part of this right now and are putting it in play, or do you think it's coming?
I think it's coming. I think there are definitely conversations around it. Even when I was at CES this year, there was a lot about like, even businesses becoming human verified or, human centric in its approach to its own people. I think there's some healthy conversations there. I don't know, because at the end of the day, there are some competing priorities, right? Especially if you're like a public company, there are definitely going to be competing priorities. So I think that's challenging. But I think one thing's for sure, like, for example, like even with generative AI, if you look at the research, pre-generative AI, that common usage of it, people would brainstorm on new approaches, new pathways forward, ideas and such. And on average, people would walk away with about 8 to 12 new ideas from a brainstorm. Now with generative AI, people may come up with thousands of more ideas, but maybe only on average 3 to 5 new, real, truly like original ideas. So even though the machine is there to remix whatever's inputted there. So a lot of the ideas are going to be already existing type of ideas, and that's unique. And so I think there is a place of balance. And I think some leaders are using kind of the phrase of adaptive intelligence. It's this idea of both human intelligence, but also leveraging that when there's an output from a machine, that you are discerning, that you have a way of assessing what the machine puts out. You're prompting it better questions. If Todd or Chad or gives you an answer, I would push back and say, hey, are there gaps in the way you're thinking about this? Is there research that's supporting that? Is this beneficial for this specific context? What are some of the things that you're not seeing because of your blind spots? What are the assumptions driving your answer? Are there other questions you should be asking me before you respond? And so it kind of forces you to stay sharp in your critical thinking skills and not just take the answer for the name of efficiency. So I think there is going to come a time where we're going to be better at even interacting with the machine. We will still need people who have really good thinking skills. And I think those will be the linchpins.
Fair enough. Okay. That's a really, really interesting answer to that. I want to kind of close out this very enlightening conversation, Charles. I really appreciate it. I really resonate with the way that you think about it. It's been very helpful. And I'm sure everyone that's listening, is getting something out of this. Again, just a small sense of urgency to think more critically about what's happening. And I think critical thinking is important, but I also picked up on something that you said, that you were a philosophy major.
Mm-hmm.
So was I.
Oh, awesome.
If you can't tell, like that's my jam. I mean, I like philosophy and like what's going on. I'm curious, what branch of philosophy were you really dialed into just in that? And then leading that into on the close, like, are there other things? Are there other more philosophical or even esoteric practices that we can be using, right now to expand our ability to navigate this critical moment in time, like in your eyes? So yeah, all the stuff you mentioned is great, but are there other things that we can be doing that might even be maybe even a little bit more different or unique?
I think for me, I've spent a lot of time in grad school working on what's called epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge that dives into like, how do we develop knowledge? How do we justify it? What are some ways that we think about an item of knowledge? And so that's an interesting part, because I'm always thinking like, well, what are really the assumptions driving a particular view on something, whether it's technology or the world? What might be interesting is for people to think about like their view of what's called metaphysics, or their view of reality, is when they think about what's actually happening in the world, how's their worldview on what they think is happening on the world? How is that? It goes back to epistemology, but what's the structure that led them to that particular place or view in life? And it takes a lot of work to be intellectually honest, but I could think like, hey, my view about tech was based on my experience at certain points in my life. It may have been influenced by certain authorities that I respected. It may be something like even intuition. And so as you start to do that, it's not so much that whether you have the right view or the wrong view. I think it's more about like the certainty of the view you have. If you have more than 50% certainty on something, there's a good chance you'll live like it's true.
Right.
Thinking about tech is like, what do I view, about AI, the future of work, or what human beings' role is today? And I think those are all like deep questions that as you think about your own purpose, those things kind of dictate for you the lens. It creates a lens through which you're making purpose statements and
Yeah.
such. And so like taking even a deeper stance than just thinking about purpose is to see like, what's the construct that created my understanding of the world? And it's a long self exploration, but I think it's incredibly beneficial because, even as I work with leaders, often their choices in business is a result of their worldview.
Almost always. I mean, it's all patterning, right? It's all mental and even emotional patterning, and beliefs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Last question on this. I'm actually just curious. Do you believe that people can change their intrinsic belief patterns? Let's say you have a belief pattern technology that is 70% way there. Like, do you think that people have the ability to make that type of foundational change? Because it changes everything when you do that. It's the core, it's the foundation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I want to say yes, but it won't be easy because you're going to need so many instances where you have to be confronted with what you believe. And people, it's more convenient not to change belief, especially in a world of specific algorithms that are like content biased algorithms. I think it's going to be even harder unless you're off your phone. But is it possible? Theoretically, yes. Because there have been things I believed in the past that I no longer believe in because of just years of thinking about it more deeply, talking with people I don't agree with. And then eventually I realized, oh, maybe I really didn't believe it all the way. But I think it's possible, but it's going to take some discipline to
Yeah.
really do some hard critical thinking work and being intellectually honest with yourself, knowing that the result may not be something you like. And I think that's where like philosophy was really good, is because it doesn't matter who said something. It matters what you ultimately think and have reasoned your way through.
Right.
And that's what you believe.
It's a really important thing we just said, that you may not like the result. Chances are you won't, because, you're protecting yourself from that truth. That's a little bit deeper down there. So sorry, we got all philosophical on this one, but I mean, we could geek out on this for another hour, I think. But it is relevant right now. I mean, because to me, just the question of who am I in this crazy world is up in the air right now with everything. And so this is a time to be more philosophical. And, I know in my work, I am definitely talking to people at these levels right now where they'll say to me, like, I have a belief system that I'm not sure is true, and I'm trying to figure out if I can change it. Right. And so reinvention, if you want to talk about reinvention, you can change your circumstances or you can change your beliefs. One's harder than the other, but one might be the key to really finding deeper levels of fulfillment if you're willing and courageous enough to go on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think podcasts like yours and the work that you do is so vitally important because I think we are at an inflection point. Technology may be an existential threat for humanity. It's quite possible. If that is even remotely possible, what does that mean for us? We ought to think about it.
Well, let's think about it. That's why we're doing this. That's why you're doing your work. And I think the more that we stay connected, people like us and people, the listeners, like, we need to fully go all in on these conversations and these explorations and come together more. I think for me, a lot of the things that's working right now are people coming together, online groups, conferences, meetings, like more of that. And I just want to thank you for being here, my brother Charles. So good meeting you, and we'll get this information out to the world.
Thanks so much, Todd.